Welcome to Daily English Stories. Every story hides a world. Some inspire, some haunt, some stay forever. Chapter 1. The Man on the Corner. The city was loud with ambition. Cars honked. Shoes tapped against the pavement. People moved quickly, heads down, eyes forward, too busy for anything that didn't serve a purpose. And on the edge of this constant motion, near the rusted gate of a forgotten alley, sat a man whose presence blended into the dust. Karim. His clothes were tattered, layers of fabric patched together not for style, but survival. A faded shawl wrapped around his shoulders. His beard had grown wild, the same color as the ash that clung to his skin. Beside him, a dented tin cup waited quietly for mercy. Few noticed it. Even fewer dropped anything inside. He had been on that corner for years. Most people thought he was just another beggar, someone to avoid. A sad, silent reminder of what failure looked like. But Karim, he had once been someone. He had once been called Baba by a little girl with pigtails. He had once danced barefoot with his wife in the rain, drunk on love and nothing else. He had once owned a small bookstore, walls lined with stories, and a heart full of hope. But life has a way of turning without warning. A fire, a single night of smoke and screams, the shop, the savings, the smiles, all gone. And when grief is too heavy, even breath becomes a burden. He had wandered from town to town, carrying his past like broken glass in his pocket, until finally he just sat down on that corner and stayed. People walked by. Some pitied, some judged. Most just didn't see him. Until one morning something changed. It was early before the rush. The street was still waking up, and Karim had just opened his eyes. A gentle breeze played with the edge of his shawl. He reached for his cup, expecting it to be empty. But instead of a coin, he found a small, neatly folded piece of paper. He frowned. Carefully, he unfolded it. Inside, in clean handwriting, were just 6 words: "You are more than you believe." He stared at it for a long time. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the unfamiliar feeling those words stirred in him. He looked around. No one. Just the usual dust, the usual silence. He kept the note. The next day there was another. This time, stars shine brightest in darkness. He blinked. He couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him, even in writing. The message didn't come with food or money, just words. But they filled him in a way bread never could. And then it became routine. Every morning a new note appeared, tucked beside his cup, sometimes held down by a pebble. Always folded, always kind, sometimes poetic, sometimes wise, sometimes playful. You are not forgotten. The world still has use for you. Pain carves the space for strength. Karim began to wait for them, not because he expected anything grand, but because they made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, visible. Some days he cried after reading them. Some days he smiled, just a little. And slowly, something shifted. He began brushing his hair with an old comb he'd found. He sat straighter. He began saying "thank you" out loud. To no one in particular, just into the air in case the stranger who left the notes was listening. The words were like gentle raindrops on dry land, not enough to flood, but enough to soften. He didn't know who was writing them. A passerby? A child? Someone who once sat where he now sat? Whoever it was? They didn't give money. They gave meaning. And for Karim, that meant more. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the city gold, a boy passed by with his mother. The child tugged her hand and whispered, "Mama, why is that man smiling?" Karim heard it. He looked up, caught the boy's curious eyes, and offered a tiny wave. The mother didn't pull him away. She nodded politely. That was new. That night, Karim didn't sleep, curled on his side. He lay on his back, eyes open, watching the stars above the buildings. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel small. He felt part of something. And as the wind rustled through the alley, he whispered to the darkness, "Thank you, whoever you are." Chapter 2. The Letter and the Lesson. Karim unfolded the newest note with trembling fingers. The ink was familiar now, looped, neat, almost calming. It read, "Even a seed in the dirt can become a tree if it believes the sun will rise." He didn't fully understand it at first, but the words clung to him like warmth in the cold. For days, he thought about that seed, wondering if he too could still grow. The notes kept coming, always at sunrise, tucked beneath a coin or balanced on the old cup he used for alms. But there were never instructions, never demands, just quiet nudges towards something more. One morning, he found a note that said simply, "Help someone today." Karim scoffed at the absurdity. "I'm the one who needs help," he thought bitterly. But that afternoon, he saw a child crying by the roadside, lost. Instinct moved him before reason could object. He helped the boy find his mother. She gave Karim nothing but a tearful thank you, and yet, for the first time in years, Karim felt needed. That night, he didn't sleep under the bridge. He sat upright, back pressed against the bricks, thinking. Who was sending the notes? What did they want? But no matter how much he pondered, the mystery remained. Another week passed. More notes, more small changes. He began cleaning his spot on the corner each morning. He greeted people with a nod instead of a blank stare. Some ignored him. Some didn't. One elderly woman stopped and handed him a wrapped sandwich, without pity in her eyes, just kindness. Then came the note that changed everything. It arrived folded into a tiny triangle, wedged between the pages of a tattered book someone had left near his corner. It read, "Go to the park. Sit by the fountain at noon. Wear the white shirt." The white shirt had been given to him by a local church volunteer weeks earlier, still folded, still clean. Karim didn't know why he obeyed, but something deeper than curiosity, perhaps a flicker of faith, made him trust the note. At exactly noon, he sat by the fountain. The sun warmed his shoulders. He waited. 15 minutes passed. 30. And then a man approached, well-dressed, probably in his 60s, eyes sharp beneath a weathered face. "You're Karim?" he asked. Karim hesitated, then nodded. The man smiled. "I was told to find you here. You helped a boy recently. That boy was my grandson?" Karim blinked, confused. "I didn't know." "He talks about you, about how calm you were. My daughter said you were kind. That's more valuable than most people's resumes." Silence stretched between them. "My name is Usman," the man said. "I built a business from nothing. I know the difference between useless and unused potential. And you are not useless." Karim looked away, shame rising. "I don't have anything. No home, no job, no worth." Usman tilted his head. "Then let's start small. Do you know how to sweep?" That day, Karim swept the floor of a small warehouse near the edge of the city. Not because he needed money, though he did, but because something inside him had shifted. Every motion, every corner cleaned, felt like reclaiming something lost. And so it began. He swept. Then he organized. Then he unloaded boxes, Within weeks, he was trusted to lock up at night. With each task, he stood a little taller. His mind, once dulled by despair, now soaked up every bit of advice, every lesson, every story Usman shared. He read old newspapers. He memorized quotes from the notes. He asked questions, lots of them. Then, one morning, a letter came. Not a note, an envelope, real, with his name handwritten across the front. Inside was a message, longer than usual. You were never the man people saw on that corner. You were the man you remembered today. Keep remembering, and one day you'll become someone impossible to forget. There was no signature, no name, just the silent truth Karim had begun to believe. The world hadn't forgotten him. He had forgotten himself. That night, as the city lights blinked on and the sound of passing cars echoed faintly through the streets, Karim smiled, not for what he had, but for what he was becoming. The beggar was learning to stand again, not just with feet, but with purpose. Chapter 3. The Richest Man in Town. The wind carried a different scent now, not the acrid fumes of traffic and dust, but the quiet hum of purpose, of life, built up from ruins. On the same street where Karim once sat hunched in rags, now stood a modest but elegant office front. Karim and Company, training, employment, hope. The gold-lettered sign shimmered under the morning sun. Passers-by often paused, staring up, unaware that the man who owned it had once begged for their spare change. Karim stood by the window of his office, sipping his morning tea, watching the world go by. He still remembered the feeling of rough pavement beneath him, the ache of hunger that clouded thought, and the way people used to look through him, like he wasn't real. But those memories, once bitter, now grounded him. They reminded him why he'd built this. Not for profit, but for redemption. For others. His journey from beggar to businessman wasn't a fairy tale. It was years of hard work, setbacks, and lessons that had dug into his bones. After the stranger's folded notes had ceased, Karim hadn't stopped seeking their message. He had memorized each word, written them down in a worn notebook he still kept in his coat pocket, now slightly frayed at the corners. Value isn't what others give you, but what you believe you carry. One of his favorites. After meeting the retired businessman, Mr. Dodd, Karim had been given more than a job. He'd been given trust. A small opportunity that Karim stretched beyond expectation. He swept floors, cleaned warehouses, and fixed broken things, not just to survive, but to learn. Mr. Dodd noticed and slowly mentored him in everything he knew, from accounting basics to negotiation. But more than that, he taught Karim dignity, a word Karim had almost forgotten existed. When Mr. Dodd passed away, he left Karim a small sum of money in his will, not large, but enough to start something. Karim didn't squander it. He opened a tiny training center in a rented room, offering skills in carpentry, tailoring, and basic literacy. He hired instructors and never forgot what it felt like to have nothing. Those who came to learn were not clients. They were reflections of his former self. Word spread. People began calling him Ustad Karim. Not because he was the richest man in town in the literal sense, though his businesses had quietly flourished, but because of the way he gave. He didn't hand out money like the wealthy sometimes did for show. Instead, he gave purpose, identity, and belief. One man he trained became a shop owner. A young woman who once begged with her child on the street now ran her own tailoring business. These, to Karim, were his true profits. Despite success, Kareem never stopped leaving notes. Every week he'd walk down alleys, behind bus stops, near shelters, and quietly tuck away folded paper with messages handwritten in the same neat style that once changed his life. You are not forgotten. Strength grows in silence. What's broken can be built again. He never signed them. It wasn't about credit. It was about passing on the invisible hand that once lifted him when he was lowest. One rainy afternoon, a journalist tracked him down. She'd heard whispers of Kareem's past, curious about the man who had quietly impacted dozens of lives. She asked for his story. He agreed, but with one condition: no photos and no mention of the stranger. When asked the secret to his success, Kareem smiled and said, "Someone believed in me before I could believe in myself. That was enough." She pressed again. Was it a mentor? A friend? Kareem looked out the window as a soaked young boy crossed the street clutching a food packet from his center. He said gently, "Maybe an angel. Maybe just someone who refused to let kindness die." The article made headlines. The man who rewrote his fate. Donations poured in. Volunteers arrived in flocks. But Kareem remained the same, humble, quiet, sleeves rolled up, heart wide open. On the anniversary of Mr. Dodd's death, Kareem walked to the bench outside the very corner he once called home. The city had changed, but the concrete still bore faint stains of the past. He sat, pulled out a note, and placed it gently on the bench. It read, "Even the smallest flame can light another. Pass it on." Then he stood, nodded to the memory of the stranger who had once left him hope instead of coins, and walked back to the building that carried his name, but never his pride. Because the richest man in town wasn't the one with the deepest pockets. He was the one who remembered what it felt like to have none, and did something about it.